Hey guys, Argent here, the character profile of Hank Schrader from Breaking Bad. So Hank is kind of interesting. He to me kind of represents the decline and kind of downfall of the white American male. He kind of seems to me like kind of the archetypical red stater. He doesn't like immigration. I think he complains about and distrusts the government. He's very big into law and order. He likes guns. He likes beer. Um, he's just kind of a masculine kind of man's man, who's increasingly becoming kind of dated and irrelevant in a society that really no longer has time for him. It's kind of like No Country for Old Man. He's the old man, and his time is running out, and we can see this in the show with his eventual death. His time more or less ran out, in part because his breed, the kind of men who built America, no longer really have any sort of place within it. So let's go into Hank a bit. So, what do I present to kind of support this view? Well, Hank casually, I believe, refers to Mexicans as beaners, which is always funny. Now, a lot of people probably are offended by this, but most of the Hispanics I know, they refer to themselves as beaners, or they refer to themselves as beans, or something like that. So that's not really that unusual a name. Nor do I really think it's that offensive, as it's pretty common to call people of various ethnicities by their like national cuisine. Like you call the British limeys, you call the Germans sauerkrauts, you call the Italians pasta twirlers, you call the French wine sippers or whatever. It's not really that unusual. But yeah, he calls them wetbacks. He calls them beaters. He makes fun of them a lot. I think like in the first episode, what made me love Hank is there's a lowrider, which is one of those cars that has hydraulics in it so it can go up and down. And Hank goes, now this is a civilization decline. You guys used to be conquistadors, and now look at this. It's a car on stilts. What the hell? And then Gomez is like, yeah, man, it's a rich and vibrant culture. But that kind of made me love him because he's kind of like this red state meat eating, beer drinking American who likes watching football, who likes shooting things with guns. It just doesn't take any bullshit. I mean, if you look at kind of the relationship of him and his wife, it's at least for most of the series a lot more harmonious. He's kind of the man of the family. His wife is pretty happy that he's the man, etc. I guess the big issue is that he doesn't have any children. Um, but Hank is kind of represents that he's an anachronism. He's also very much like the white American male in general, a a tragic hero. We can see this in when he gets transferred to the station along the border, and immediately his entire section gets blown up, and he's the only survivor, and he suffers post-traumatic stress disorder from that. I mean, guys like him are kind of used to a very different type of war. They're used to things like going overseas to Vietnam or America, Vietnam or Germany, fighting the war, coming home, etc. But now the war is on their doorstep, and now they're fighting a completely different breed of criminal. Literally, they're having to deal with these Latino gangsters who do crazy shit like cut a guy's head off, put it on a tortoise, and then put C4 in the tortoise. Like, how are you supposed to deal with people like that? How are you supposed to fight stuff like that? And we see kind of throughout the series that Hank doesn't speak Spanish, and he's kind of an anachronism because of that. Because he speaks the national language in a country that increasingly rejects the concept of even having a national language. Um, as we can see, a lot of an increasing number of kind of the DEA agents are either Hispanic or are kind of adopting Hispanic customs and Spanish as a language to try and understand their enemies better. But in a sense, it's showing that the Southwest is basically ending, and that guys like Hank are just fighting a losing battle. So we have that. We have him killing Tuco. So he manages to kill Tuco Salamanca, and then he is rewarded and praised for that by the department. But for whatever reason, he suffers a lot of guilt over it. He feels bad for shooting the guy. He kind of views himself as a bit of a murderer, which I kind of find interesting because Hank doesn't really seem like the kind of character who would suffer a crisis of conscience after doing something kind of banal as gunning down a guy. I guess to a certain extent, it kind of represents that he kind of was unprepared for what it would be like. I think to another extent, it just shows how badly he was shaken by kind of that first time he got transferred, when he had to go to the border and his whole team died. Um, I kind of view him as kind of increasingly just being incapable of dealing with the escalating violence and corruption. Um, it's kind of like the movie. It's No Country for Old Men. Um, it's no country for guys like Hank, guys who are from a different era, when just all this bullshit just didn't really happen, at least not to the same degree. So we have that. Then we have kind of the other big thing in his life, where he gets shot multiple times when fighting the twins. So he fights the twins, and he succeeds in killing them. But once again, this is something different. This is something kind of crazy. He didn't expect this coming, because in America, you don't expect people to just start killing police officers. I know in Canada, whenever a cop gets killed on duty, we have like a national funeral almost for them, because it's very rare. But in Mexico, they just do this shit all the time. And Hank hasn't really, like, he lives in a normal house. He doesn't really take any extraordinary security precautions, but he kind of gets shot in the back, because that's the increasing reality of the Southwest and of America in general, that you're going to see more and more of this as it imports a culture in which this kind of thing is just considered normal. Um, so we have that, and then Hank kind of goes through kind of an existential crisis, because the thing that kind of gave him meaning in his life was his job, was attempting to kind of hold back the night, attempting to kind of try and maintain some aspect of the country he loved. And when he's in the hospital, he can't really do that anymore. And I think he's really starting to feel by this point in time that he's just getting worn down. That there's an infinite number of these assholes who are going to keep coming across the border. He's going to have to keep shooting them, and he doesn't think he can handle it. It's just it's kind of like what happened in Vietnam, where people are just like, why are we going overseas to fight for the benefit of this foreign country when there's so many problems at home? I think that's increasingly kind of how Hank's feeling, that he's in a foreign country, that he's not in his country anymore. So he eventually gets out and he succeeds in kind of helping to bring down Gus. And then he gets promoted. And the promotion is probably the worst thing that can happen to Hank, because I kind of feel once he gains kind of the power and kind of the position he sought, he kind of sees how little he can realistically do about the situation. Um, Even though they managed to take down Fring, and even though Fring managed to destroy the drug cartels, or the which what is it this not the Sonora, the Juarez cartel. Just a bunch more take its place, and then we have like Jack's gang and Declan and all these other guys who just come in, and it just gets worse and worse, and it's just a losing battle. And Hank kind of starts to get hyper focused on finding Heisenberg, because I guess Heisenberg is kind of becoming the whale to his Ahab. That if he can just beat Heisenberg, then maybe he can regain some of his honor, etc. And I kind of feel like what eventually breaks him is finding out that Walt is Heisenberg, because he kind of saw Walt as another kind of white American male like himself. He saw him as kind of a kindred spirit. Um, and it's kind of to him, it's not only is this foreign invader coming in, but we can't even really trust our own people anymore. And to that, I kind of see that as, to some extent, why he accepts his death so gracefully. Because I think he kind of realizes that his time is up. I mean, when you see him as head of the DEA, he's kind of terrible at the job. He's never on time. Routine work doesn't get done. His bosses complain about him. But by that point, I think he kind of realizes that he has one last thing to do, take down Heisenberg. And in the end, he's not really killed by a drug cartel. He's killed by other white male Americans who have kind of given in to the corruption and violence that's sweeping their society, and basically just kind of accepts his death almost with a bit of gratitude that he no longer has to fight this endless war, that he can finally rest in peace. So that's kind of my view of Hank Schrader. He's kind of the archetypical white American man. He's kind of the person who built America, who made America great, who fought in its wars, who built its factories, etc. And with the end of Hank and people like him, we see the end of America as it's traditionally known. And Breaking Bad, I think, is in part a comment on the American dream and how that dream has collapsed and how it's changed over time. This is Argent Templar signing out.